Welcome to BBC News Now. We begin with the breaking news that Iran's supreme leader has appeared on state television claiming victory over Israel and downplaying the impact of US airstrikes on his country's nuclear program. It's the first time Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has appeared in public since the ceasefire halted days of missile and airstrikes between the two countries. And with me here in the studio is Siavash Ardalan from BBC Persian, part of BBC World Service. Siavash, we've heard rhetoric from the United States and from Israel on what's been happening between Israel and Iran. Now more rhetoric from the supreme leader of the country. Just to analyse for us what he's been saying.
Well, it wasn't a public message. It was delivered, pre-recorded in an undisclosed location, which is where he probably has been since the beginning of the war, when the Israelis numerously tried to talk, at least spoke of assassinating him. Predictably, he presented Iran as the victorious side in this war, very much along the side of the narrative that state media has been pushing over the past 2 days since the ceasefire came into effect, that Iran managed to defeat Israel, managed to impose a peace both on the US and Israel. So the supreme leader here congratulates the Iranian nation on two counts, on counts of defeating Israel, crushing Israel, and also on defeating the United States, making direct references to President Trump's statements yesterday about the Iranian attack on the U.S. military base, saying that that attack, in fact, did inflict damages on that military base, and the fact that the U.S. became involved in this war in favor of Israel indicates and is proof of the fact that Iran was winning.
And saying that the US president needed to do showmanship. That was the quote from the Ayatollah. It's going to be interesting to see how the US Defense Secretary responds to these comments in the press conference we're expecting in the next hour. And how, Siavash, does this set up potential talks between the US and Iran that Donald Trump alluded to yesterday?
Well, we know the talks are taking place next week. That's what President Trump said yesterday. Now, depending on whose side you listen to, President Trump made it sound very easy. We're just going to hand them a piece of paper. They're going to sign it. We destroyed their nuclear industry. They don't have a nuclear weapons capability, so there's nothing really to talk about. There is no need really to engage in very deep, lengthy negotiations. Whereas what the Ayatollah is saying is very different. He is saying that US's attacks did not inflict significant damage on Iran's nuclear centers. Very much at the same time when in the US it's embroiled in its own controversy over how much damage has been inflicted. He said it didn't inflict significant damage. The issue of nuclear enrichment was just an excuse for an attack. He didn't say that Iran will continue to stand by the enrichment issue, but he said they're asking for our surrender, sometime under the guise of ending enrichment, sometime under the guise of human rights, sometime under the guise of missiles, but we will not surrender.
So finally, beyond that rhetoric, though, privately, do you think the Iranian regime is ready to negotiate with the US, is ready to come to some kind of accommodation?
Well, we have to really see, because we're not getting the same kind of messages coming from the foreign ministry wing of the regime and the more hardline groups within the political establishment. Whether Iran will continue to insist on enrichment, how really steadfast it will try to be in sticking to its guns, we have to see, because what the supreme leader said today sounded very uncompromising. On some Iranian critics, in their view, disconnected from reality, and other people's view, what you would expect from the supreme leader of a country who's just emerged from war.
OK. Siavash, really good to get your analysis. Siavash Ardalan from BBC Persian. Well, let's discuss this further now and cross live to my colleague Mark Lowen, who is in Tel Aviv. Mark.
Anita, thanks very much indeed. Yes, as we've just been hearing, the supreme leader of Iran suggests that the damage to Iran's nuclear facilities has been overplayed by the United States. That goes in contradiction to the words of America's top intelligence official, the CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who came out with an assessment saying that Iran's facilities had been severely damaged and its nuclear program set back by several years. But he fell short of saying that it had been completely destroyed. Key Trump administration officials in recent days, including the president himself, have been repeating constantly that the sites in Iran have been completely obliterated. An Israeli assessment says that the US bombing, combined with its own attacks, set back by years Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. A leaked Pentagon assessment had earlier suggested that Iran's program had probably only been set back by a few months. Well, let's bring in our correspondent Dan Johnson, who is live with us from Jerusalem. Dan, we've just heard there from Iran's supreme leader, framing it as a victory for Iran, pretty much diametrically opposed to how Israel is framing it.
Absolutely, yes. Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly reasserted how effective the strikes that his country, with the support of the Americans, launched on Iran's nuclear program. He said that the conflict lasting 12 days had successfully eradicated the dual threats of the Iranian nuclear facilities and also the ballistic missile threat that Iran had posed to this country. There's been the back and forth that we've seen of different intelligence assessments, the US president's account of this, different versions of exactly how destructive those strikes were and how far back Iran's nuclear program had been set. The Ayatollah telling his people that his country had come through this conflict with its nuclear facilities intact, essentially, and that it had been able to launch strikes that had a devastating effect on this country, Israel.
Yeah, and also saying that Iran had inflicted damage on that US airbase in Qatar, the Al Udeid base. Yesterday, Donald Trump was saying that Iran called us up and said, is it okay if we strike at 1 a.m? And we said it's fine. So, obviously, again, very different narratives there. Meanwhile, Dan, just give us the latest on a rather unusual intervention by Donald Trump into Benjamin Netanyahu's legal woes here in Israel.
Yes, after the seemingly tense exchange between the two leaders at the start of this ceasefire, when Donald Trump's understood to have phoned Benjamin Netanyahu to tell him to call back the Israeli planes that were heading to Iran to potentially launch